Let's turn our attention to one of the largest resettlement programs in the history of IOM, the Bhutanese Large-Scale Resettlement Project that was managed from Damak, Nepal. Taking a look back at how the program operated will allow us to bring into focus the core services IOM provides in resettlement. At the peak, there were nearly 110,000 Bhutanese refugees living in eastern Nepal. Today, just a few thousand remain, the majority having been resettled to 8 countries: Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Norway, Denmark, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and the United States. During the late 1970s to mid-1980s, laws were passed in Bhutan that marginalized the citizenship rights of Bhutanese nationals of Nepali origin. They had originally migrated from Nepal to Bhutan for economic reasons many years earlier, possibly in the early 1800s, and in modern-day Bhutan, they were primarily rice farmers. The government declared them illegal migrants, despite them having citizenship cards. In the early 1990s, more than 100,000 ethnic Nepalis fled Bhutan, and the majority found their way to eastern Nepal. By 1992, the government of Nepal and UNHCR had established 7 camps in eastern Nepal for the Bhutanese refugees. The government of Nepal and the UN Refugee Agency deserve considerable credit for ensuring security, shelter, education, and health care. Let's take a look inside one Bhutanese refugee camp in Nepal and learn more about the lives and culture of the people who live there. This is Beldanji Refugee Camp, as pictured in the early 2010s. As you can see, the houses are made of bamboo. There was no formal electricity grid in the camp, although refugees made informal connections to the power grid on the road in some areas of the camps. The camp is surrounded by jungle and elephants. One of the biggest threats to the refugees there was elephant attacks. Inside of the huts were furnished and decorated, but provided little relief from the heat or cold, or from the rain during monsoon season. They also did not provide much privacy, as the walls were porous. Because they were made out of bamboo, they easily caught on fire. Over the years, refugees who fled Bhutan with very little accumulated possessions from the shops surrounding the camps and from the local towns. Some Bhutanese refugees ran small shops out of their homes or sold items such as jewelry, paintings, other artwork, or weaving. Refugees also engaged in all kinds of work in the informal economy and through employment projects in the camps. In this picture, we see individuals who are working for a local tailor. UNHCR and other organizations also hosted livelihood programs that taught refugees new skills they could use in Nepal or in resettlement countries. Here, women make their livelihood using a traditional method of spinning yarn. The yarn is sold to other refugees or to local shops. Many of the children living in the camps grew up there and had never known anything else, including life in Bhutan. As of 2007, when resettlement started, only people in their late teens would have been born in Bhutan, and only those in their 20s might have a clear memory of it. This is the case in many protracted refugee and displacement situations. All of the children in the camp attended schools which are sponsored by an NGO called Caritas. This is a typical Bhutanese camp school. When resettlement started, some of the first people to sign up for the program were teachers and administrators, so that caused a dearth of qualified educators. All Nepali and Bhutanese children are taught English in school. All 7 camps had medical clinics where refugees could obtain free medical services. If someone needed more extensive medical care, there was a hospital they could go to in Damak. Healthcare in eastern Nepal is basic, with limited emergency services, and factors like electricity and qualified nurses are an issue. Now let's learn about the background behind the resettlement program. While there were numerous rounds of bilateral talks between the government of Nepal and the government of Bhutan, the refugees were not able to return to Bhutan. Although Bhutanese refugees in Nepal enjoy considerable latitude by the government of Nepal's open camp policy, Bhutanese refugees are not legally allowed to work, own property, run businesses, or vote. This situation remained static for more than 2 decades, with the refugees heavily dependent on the aid provided by international organizations and NGOs. After exhaustive efforts towards repatriation failed, a core group of countries and the UN Refugee Agency initiated a plan for third country resettlement. This plan was endorsed by the government of Nepal in November of 2007. In this case, and as is typical with most resettlement programs, UNHCR was the first step for refugees seeking resettlement. Refugees submitted a declaration of interest form, and thereafter, UNHCR interviewed the family to determine eligibility and also to determine the most appropriate country of resettlement. Following referral to a country of resettlement, IOM assumed primary responsibility for resettlement. Based in Damak, a small town in convenient proximity to the 7 refugee camps, IOM was engaged in a wide range of activities. The Resettlement Support Center interviewed refugee cases and prepared government forms for country selection missions. IOM organized these selection missions and accommodated officials at the IOM guest house. The IOM Migration Health Department conducted health assessments for refugees in accordance with the specific protocols for resettlement countries. The IOM Cultural Orientation Unit provided 5-day courses to prepare refugees for their life in their new country. The Operations Unit ran a fleet of 15 buses to provide ground transportation for refugees between the 7 camps in Damak. In addition, Operations organized up to 12 charter flights each week for resettlement-bound refugees from eastern Nepal to Kathmandu. In Kathmandu, refugees were accommodated at the IOM Transit Center for between 1 and 3 nights prior to their flight to the country of resettlement. The transit center could accommodate 400 individuals per night. IOM organized all the resettlement flights from Kathmandu to the destination country. Operations staff arranged flights in coordination with the settlement agencies in the resettlement countries, assisted refugees with formalities at the Kathmandu airport, and provided flight escorts when required. We'll look at each of these steps in detail. Case management is a core area of IOM work that, depending on the resettlement country, can include many steps, such as receiving and logging a referral from UNHCR, communicating with refugees about the resettlement process and answering questions, conducting interviews with the individual or family to gather biographical information and information about education and employment histories, as well as information about why they fled their country of origin. It can also include preparing paperwork for selection missions from resettlement countries, submitting information needed for resettlement countries to run security checks, processing the decision of the resettlement country and informing UNHCR and the refugees, and counseling the refugees on their placement location if they are approved for resettlement. If someone was approved for refugee status, they then underwent medical exams. The medical exams are critical because they determine a refugee's ability to travel, whether a medical escort is needed, and whether IOM must address any medical issues prior to departure. It also allows IOM to communicate with resettlement agencies about what refugees might need post-arrival. Every day, the IOM medical clinic saw hundreds of Bhutanese refugees for their health assessments and follow-up appointments. Communicable diseases, such as tuberculosis or TB, are one of the biggest issues for Bhutanese refugees in Nepal. Each refugee considered for resettlement received a comprehensive TB screening by IOM. Refugees who were found to have TB were treated. IOM also ran an inpatient treatment center for refugees who were found to have multi-drug resistant TB. Once refugees are accepted by a resettlement country, the pre-departure or cultural orientation class was held. In these 5-day classes, IOM taught refugees about life in their resettlement country. For Bhutanese, this class is critical because the resettlement country cultures and lifestyles are so different from their own. Once all clearances on their resettlement cases were done, IOM booked the refugees for travel. As much as possible, they were booked in groups, and IOM assisted them throughout the travel process. The first step for Bhutanese refugees was to leave the camp and go to the Damak office. Then they were bused to a nearby city for their flight to Kathmandu. After several days in Kathmandu, they left for their resettlement countries. In Kathmandu, IOM ran a refugee transit center that was specifically designed for people to stay several days. While the refugees were at the transit center, IOM offered them laundry services, helped them repack if needed, and carried out pre-departure medical checks. The refugees were also able to spend time with their relatives in Kathmandu if they had them there. Pictured here is a dorm room. The rooms housed up to 20 or 30 people, grouped by families. The transit center in total hosted up to 400 people per night. Travel was one of the most difficult parts of the journey for refugees departing Nepal. In their travel preparation classes, IOM created a mock airplane and walked refugees through the process of showing their ticket, going through security screening, finding their airplane seat, opening the airplane restroom door, and asking for water and food during the flight. On the day of international travel, IOM movement operations staff gave everyone IOM stickers that would be helpful in the event they got lost in the airport. They also handed out to refugees what is called the IOM travel packet, which holds immigration and biographical documents. The refugees must carry this all the way to their resettlement country to present to immigration authorities when they arrive. At the airport, IOM movement operations staff ensured that all refugees made it through the check-in and security check processes and safely boarded their flights. An IOM staff member or affiliate met the refugees during their transit, and IOM staff members also typically meet the refugees upon arrival to their resettlement countries. Once the Bhutanese refugees reached their countries of resettlement, their journey with IOM, for many, was over. However, some IOM offices in refugee receiving countries work with newly arrived refugees to help them integrate into their new societies.